Hello, I'm Malcolm Cox, and this is your Tuesday teaching tip for Tuesday, the 13th of December 2016. And today we're talking about sermon structure. How do we arrive at the structure for our sermon? How many points should we have? And how do we figure that out? And by the way, if you've already subscribed to these recordings, thank you ever so much. If you haven't, please do so and let your friends know so we can spread the word, really. So, sermon structure. We're going to take some ideas from a book I've mentioned before called Preaching with Humanity by Wright and Stevenson. And we're in chapter 6 of their book called Preparing to Preach and How to Work Out the Best Sermon Structure. How many points should we have? They have a great quote here on page 72 of their book from another person called the Reverend Douglas Holt about how many points. And his insistence is that there is only 1 point. Let me read for you. Always preach only one, repeat 1 point, unless you have decided to be very textually tight. If your text requires 3 points, go with it. Otherwise, make it 1 point and develop the idea. Embellish it. Tell it in a story. Point out other scriptures that say it differently. Remind the congregation where you started and remind them of the 1 point you are making. 1 point, lovingly developed and embellished, storified, narrated, illustrated, coloured and retold will have a chance of being remembered. And that's a very fair point, isn't it? 1 point may well be remembered. More than one may not. Now, should that mean there's only one thing and that's all there is? What about the rest of the structure? Well, of course, the rest of the structure should support that 1 point. Someone once said that a sermon should be more like a bullet than a shotgun. The problem with a shotgun is you often get collateral damage, whereas the bullet goes right to the heart of the matter. I'm not sure that's the best illustration for my point there, but nonetheless, it makes a point. 1 point, but maybe some structure around it to help it to come alive and become meaningful to the people to whom we are speaking. So what do we do with that? Well, I got some tips from this chapter to help us to think through how we develop our structure and what we put into it, but in particular the bare bones of the structure. And we're going to talk about, in classic sermon form, 3 points. Point number 1, fit the structure to the passage. Fit the structure to the passage rather than fit the passage to the structure. In other words, we probably all have our favourite structures for sermons. We need to be careful that we're not fitting the passage to the structure. The structure must be the servant of the passage. So, for example, in Luke chapter 15, I preached recently about the parable of the 2 lost sons and the father. There's clearly, I think, 1 point. Now, you could debate what that precise 1 point is, but I would say something like, the point is, this is how God views sinners. The sinner who went away and the sinner who stayed in the home. There's 2 sinners there, if you like, and it's Jesus showing the Pharisees and the crowd around him how people views all different kinds of sinners, and then the crowd have to choose how they react to that. But however, having said that, although I think there is really only 1 point in that passage, there are several acts, aren't there? If we go to that passage, the first act is the young son asking the father for his inheritance. The second act is he goes away. The third act, he becomes penniless and destitute. The fourth act, he comes home. The fifth act, there's a party. And the sixth act, the older son, the father going out to the older son and saying, come on, come and join this great party. Your lost brother has come back and been found. My son has come back and been found. So several acts, and that would presumably inform the structure of the sermon. So we have 1 point, but more than one sub-point, perhaps, or way of structuring things. So my thought would be for us not to get stuck with the structures that we prefer, but experiment. As we find a passage that has a different kind of structure to ones we often use, then allow that structure to dominate and inform how you then preach. Have a look for what's naturally in the scriptures. My question would be the next passage you pull out to have a look at, to prepare a lesson for, what's the natural structure within it, and let your sermon structure fit around that natural structure that's in the passage. And here's another tip, another idea with this. Try drawing the passage as a comic strip. So you've got some panels there. How many panels would you have to make a comic strip work? Maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 5. I've done this before. I'm not going to show you my examples because my artistic talents are extremely limited and would be distracting. But as you draw a comic strip with the panels, maybe that shows you your structure. So point number 1, make the structure fit the passage. Point number 2, make the sermon structure fit the occasion. The occasion, which is the occasion on which you are preaching or teaching this lesson. What's going on around this? Are you intending to do quite a short lesson? Perhaps, as I did with the Luke 15 passage I preached, you've got communion coming immediately after. I think that might change things compared to if communion was separate. It was part of the whole presentation in a way. What's coming before? What's going after? In our situation, we didn't have many guests with us that day. It was almost all church members, which changed a bit the emphasis. I made the lesson a little longer than I otherwise would have done, and a bit more technical, because the people there understood what was going on in the passage in a general sense. So the questions to ask ourselves to make sure that the structure fits the occasion are: what's going before and what's going after my lesson? What precedes and what follows? And secondly, I suppose, what's the focus of the event? Is it for guests? Is it for members? Is it for younger people, older people? What's the situation? So firstly, let's make sure it fits the passage. Secondly, let's make sure our structure fits the occasion. And thirdly, let's make sure it fits the actual people who will be there. Who will be there with us? Again, when we did this in Watford and we looked at Luke 15, most people there knew the passage quite well. They'd been Christians quite a long time. It was also a small group, a dozen of us perhaps as adults sitting in that room. And also the group are very used to interaction. So I built in a lot of interaction into the lesson, and it allowed the structure to be less set, less formalized than I normally would, and given that situation. So some questions to help us to help the structure fit the people that will be there would be: what are the people expecting? Would it be helpful to go with what they might be expecting? What would be normal in terms of structure for our situation? Or would it be helpful to go against the structure that they'd be expecting, such that might help them to be alert and awake and really take in what they're hearing, might help them think differently about a passage they've heard many times before? That's another reason why I preached with a very loose structure on this passage, because I thought it might help the people there to latch on to the actual text rather than think about the structure that I had. So, just to finish off here, how many points should a lesson have? Generally speaking, just 1. But what about the structure? Consider the passage, the structure naturally within it. Consider the occasion, what goes before and after. And consider the people to whom you will be speaking and what their expectations are, and whether to match them or whether to go against them. Not to make a point, but to help the point of the passage come through more clearly. And what does passage, occasion, and people spell? Pop. Help if we adopt this, it will help our messages have more pop. Think about the people, think about the occasion, think about the passage, and let's give our messages plenty of pop. Let me know your ideas. What helps to make a passage come alive for you in terms of its structure? How do you derive a structure out of a text, out of a passage? What gets it clearer for you as you look for the structure that will be best for any particular lesson? Let me know. You can email me, mccx@mac.com, or you can leave a message anywhere you hear or see this recording. Thanks so much for listening to this, and let me know your comments. Until the next time, I hope you have a terrific Tuesday and a wonderful week. God bless.